I recently discovered this case and was rather surprised by the lack of coverage it seemed to have received. All of the cases I cover on this channel are dark by default, but there are some that are just that little bit more disturbing. The crime I'm going to be covering was so despicable that the judge recommended that the jurors seek counselling after the trial. Grace Packer was born on the 14th of August 2001. She was born 2 months early and weighed just 4 pounds and 5 ounces. She was so small that her mother had to dress her in doll's clothing. Shortly after Grace was born, she was put into care. Grace's birth name was actually Susan Hunsaker, but I will continue to refer to her as Grace just to keep things simple. Her parents lost custody of Grace and her 2 other siblings. There were allegations that her parents could not provide a safe home for them. Grace's mother suffered from severe mental illness, and her father had mild learning difficulties. Her mother did not take the medication she was prescribed, which caused some problems. But she did try and comply with the orders from the youth services and visited her children 3 times a week while they were in foster care, hoping to regain custody one day. Sarah Packer and her husband David Packer were the ones who adopted Grace when she was just 3 years old, along with her 1-year-old brother in 2004. The couple then renamed the children. This is when Susan's name was changed to Grace. Grace's other older sibling went to a different foster home. Sarah and David had fostered dozens of children over the years, so her biological parents believed she was in safe hands. Sarah and David seemed to really love Grace's younger brother, but they treated Grace completely different. Sarah would shout at her, hit her, and emotionally and physically abuse her. She would often confine Grace to her bedroom or even the basement. In 2010, the police showed up to the house responding to a call regarding David Packer. The caller claimed that David had been forcing himself upon one of their teenage foster children. The matter was investigated, and the teenager said that she was often tied to her bed, and that she was often made to wear revealing clothing. She was made to sleep in the room directly across from David's room. Whenever he felt like it, he would go across and force himself upon her. Photographs of these crimes taking place were uncovered on his mobile phone. David Packer admitted to the crimes against the teenager, and he also admitted to doing the same to Grace when she was only 5 years old. He was sentenced to 18 months to 5 years in prison in 2011. After David was sent to prison, Sarah lost her job where she worked as a supervisor at an adoption agency, and she was no longer allowed to foster any more children and bring them into her home. However, Grace and her brother remained in Sarah's custody. Sarah and David broke up, and she eventually met a man in 2013 named Jacob Sullivan. From 2013 to 2015, Grace left Pennsylvania and attended a number of special schools in North Carolina. She had some learning difficulties and was briefly in the care of one of the Packers' cousins. But in November of 2015, Grace returned to Pennsylvania with Sarah. It's here when Sarah and her new boyfriend Jacob Sullivan began planning her death. On July the 11th, 2016, Sarah reported 14-year-old Grace missing from the family's home. Sarah told the investigators that the two had had an argument on the 8th of July about Grace going to a friend's house, which Sarah claimed resulted in Grace being sent to her room, and described her foster daughter as an overly stubborn teenager. She then told the investigators that Grace was nowhere to be found when she went to check on her the following day, and claimed that $300 in cash was taken from her home. On July the 12th, a detective began working on the case who spoke with Sarah, and Sarah said she would drop off the photos of Grace at the police station, but she never did. For the next 2 months, the detective tried to contact Sarah, but they never got any response. When the investigators went to the family's home on the 7th of September, they discovered that Sarah had moved away without telling them. They also discovered that Grace's 12-year-old brother had been withdrawn from his school, but no reason or next address was given to the school. On that same day, the investigator managed to track down Sarah. Sarah apologized for not keeping in contact with the investigators and sent over the photos of Grace the following day. This kind of behavior was of course extremely suspicious. Other family members of Sarah were contacted and questioned about the disappearance, all of which said they had only recently been told that Grace was missing. Then, a letter from March was discovered saying that Grace was sorry for being a burden and that she was planning on running away. But the detectives discovered that the writing style of the letter didn't match how Grace would spell or write, and something was clearly off. Investigators then spoke to Grace's friend, the friend she was supposedly going to visit the day that Sarah and Grace had an argument. The girl and the mother said there was no plans for Grace to come over. All of the information so far and the lack of care from Sarah was becoming concerning to the investigators. Sarah had also continued to collect the $712 a month social security check in Grace's name. She never bothered to tell the agency that Grace was missing, meaning that she could continue to receive the payments. And then tragically, in October of 2016, some hunters were out in a wooded area in Luzerne County Park. As they were walking, they came across a truly horrific sight. They found a dismembered torso and a head. The body would later be identified as Grace, and the K9 teams found her arms and legs nearby. The investigators on the case would immediately announce that Grace's adoptive mother Sarah was a person of interest in the Despicable murder. During a search of Sarah's home, the police found a receipt from October the 16th. The receipt was from a tractor supply store for the purchase of a bone saw and 2 extra blades. But the search did not turn up the saw or the blades. Video surveillance from the store showed that Sarah had bought them. A forensic pathologist who examined Grace's body told the police that her bones exhibited scarring and marks consistent with being cut by a bone saw. On November the 11th, 2016, Sarah was charged with child endangerment and the obstruction of the administration of law. She was held on a $200,000 bond. On the 23rd of December 2016, Sarah was released after Jacob posted a $10,000 bond. The courts had decided to lower the bail. On December the 30th, the police received a call from a woman named Catherine Albright. Sarah and Jacob were in a polyamorous relationship with Catherine, and she had just found the couple unconscious and believed they had taken an overdose of pills in what seemed to be a suicide attempt. A couple of weeks later, Jacob came round at the hospital. He then told the staff that he and Sarah had entered into a suicide pact before taking the prescription medication. He then began to confess. He told them that he had killed Grace. Jacob told the police that he and Sarah drove Grace to one of their rental homes on the 8th of July. They brought her inside and gave her some food that was drugged. Jacob then began to punch her in the face several times, causing her to bleed. They then both dragged her to the attic. They ball-gagged her mouth and hog-tied her with zip ties. Jacob then forced himself upon her. While Jacob did this horrific act, Sarah just stood and watched. While this was happening, Grace turned and looked at her adopted mother for help, to which she replied, "I can't help you anymore. This is now your life." Jacob said that Sarah seemed to enjoy what was happening. Initially, the couple had planned to keep Grace locked up in the hot attic for Jacob to enact his twisted fantasies upon her whenever he wanted, but they both decided that it would be best for Grace to die. The pair left her tied up and drugged in the dark, sweltering attic, alone and terrified. They were hoping that the drugs and heat would kill her. The next day, they came back to check on Grace, only to discover that she had broken free of her zip ties and had spat out the gag. Jacob grabbed her, put her in a chokehold, and squeezed the life out of her. After Grace had passed, the couple stored the body in cat litter to absorb the smell of Grace's body as it began to decompose. It's then when Sarah purchased the bone saw to cut up the body and dump Grace in the woods where the hunters would later find her remains. Sarah and Jacob were arrested and both were denied bail. During the trial, the court heard the disturbing details and the timeline of Grace's last moments. Jacob pleaded guilty to murder. He said that Grace was a nightmare child and the couple just didn't want to deal with her anymore, but that they also wanted to continue receiving the money they got for caring for Grace. During the sentencing phase, part of Jacob's confession would be played out in which he could be heard laughing as he reminisced the night they took Grace's life, and how Grace looked to Sarah for help when he did what he did. During Sarah's trial, she told the jury that she hated Grace, and she made a statement. She said Grace had become, for a lack of a better word, a non-entity. She just didn't exist anymore. I wanted her to go away. Sarah had offered up Grace to Jacob. She said she was scared of losing him, so this was a way to keep him around. She then said that she got caught up in his fantasies. But the prosecutors would prove that Sarah was far more than just an onlooker in what happened to Grace. They believed that she pushed and encouraged Jacob to do what he did. She wanted to see her adopted daughter suffer. They discovered Facebook messages between Sarah and another man, in which she offered him a virgin. Sarah had fostered around 30 children over the years. Jacob was sentenced to death. The judge stated, "You have no soul. I have never said that to another human being in my life, and I hope I don't have to say it again." In April of 2020, Jacob passed away from heart complications in prison. It's sad that a little bit of prison justice was not served. Sarah pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison. She managed to escape the death penalty after agreeing to a plea deal. According to an inmate in the same prison as Sarah, she had once commented about Grace, saying, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." It would be uncovered during the court hearing that Grace had been abused by Sarah and other men for years. Grace had been a victim of SA for the majority of her life, before meeting a horrific end at the hands of the people that were supposed to care for her. Despite these despicable people claiming that Grace was an awful child, other relatives testified that Grace was a bright and bubbly girl who loved music and swimming, and would often befriend those at school who were struggling to make friends.